I mean, you got to keep in mind, this bike is almost 200 horsepower, literally. And it weighs about 478 pounds. So it's a little on the heavier side, being that it's 1300 cc's. But you know what's interesting? It doesn't feel that heavy at all when you're riding. And when you're leaning, I mean, this bike is incredibly light. Now, with this bike being as heavy as it is, first-time riders are going to look at this bike and be super intimidated because how big it is. And with you being intimidated, you can make a whole lot of mistakes. That's why people always say it's good to start on a smaller displacement bike. But we're not here to talk about smaller displacement bikes. We're here to talk about if it's good to start on this. The interesting thing about riding it is that it's a very comfortable motorcycle. As you're sitting on it, your legs are very relaxed. You're not too hunched over. It feels kind of like you're on a naked bike, but in a sport bike riding position, if that makes sense. So with the riding height and positioning and everything, the bike feels very comfortable. And I've grown to learn that people can start on a wide array of motorcycles, but ultimately it's going to depend on your temperament. See, this bike is very chill when in low RPMs and you're not using too much throttle. But once you get on that throttle, oh, the power's there. It's there, it's ready to use at your disposal. With you trying to ride this bike, it may feel terrifying that you don't know exactly what to do. And the thing is, I encourage people to learn on a motorcycle as much as you can with somebody with experience. If you have somebody there to really walk you through all of the controls, getting used to cornering, throttle response, those are going to be your biggest things. Because if you got throttle response down and you're not scared to lean the bike, I think any motorcycle is technically okay. All about the rider. I mean, this bike is so mild-tempered, it's kind of crazy. But if you get on it, oh my God, you get on it, she goes. But you know, while going 70 miles per hour, barely using the throttle, right now I'm cruising. If you're not starting on a 400 or a 300, you got to keep in mind it's going to be intimidating riding this bike, no matter what your temperament is, because it's still new. And with learning on a bigger bike, it's going to take a lot longer to get used to compared to the 300 or 400. When I got my Z400, I was able to ride that bike no issues shortly after I got it. But there is some mistakes that I made on that bike. Had I made on this or any other bigger bike, I would have been screwed. The clutch is more forgiving on a smaller motorcycle. Keep in mind, if you pop the clutch on something like this bike is going in the air faster than you can blink. Sure, it's tamed most of the time while riding, but how long does it take to get used to the power of a bike, to know how to tame it and how to get the most out of it when you feel best? You know what I'm saying? There's a lot of YouTubers, including myself, hell, who advise against starting on a bigger CC bike. But it all boils down to you at the end of the day, because how many people have you met who have started on these bikes and have been just fine? I try to be very careful with the advice I give because these things have been done. It's tough to tell somebody that they can't start on a bigger bike when people have done it before. It's like if the success rate was 0 from starting on a bigger bike, then you can easily say that. But because there's proof of so many people who have started on a bigger bike, it's kind of hard to just say, hey, don't do that. Now again, I make the suggestion that you should start on a smaller bike, but it's not like no hard thing like, hey, no, only start on a small bike, because it's different for everybody. Do you know how many really big guys who are 6'6", 300 pounds, and they're like, hey, what bike should I start on? How are you going to tell them to start on a 300 or a 400? I mean, honestly, have you ever seen that before? If you think about it, this bike to somebody with that weight and height, it may feel like a baby bike. And that's why you got to be careful with the advice that you give. I mean, you really, really do. You really do. So yeah, guys, ultimately, can you start on a bigger bike? You can. It's possible. It's been done. You have to ride with the most caution that you possibly can imagine. You have to be able to take your time. Even when you think you mastered something, you haven't mastered everything. I remember I went down on my 636 doing a wheelie. I thought I got used to doing wheelies because I did plenty of them and I was fine. The one time I underestimated that power, I was screwed. That bike came up way quicker than I could blink. And that's when I realized, okay, just because you get used to the power doesn't mean that it's not there. Let me say that again. Just because you get used to the power doesn't mean that it's not there. Ride safe, guys, ride with caution. And if you do get something like this, please be humble, learn everything you can about it, and get somebody to teach you and walk you through every step. Don't think that you know everything, because you don't.